Good morning again, everyone, and welcome back. My name's Andy Walker. I'm an infrastructure journalist who writes extensively about the infrastructure sector in the UK and overseas. And welcome to the first panel session in Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week, the UK's biggest green infrastructure conference for the energy economy. Thanks again to our sponsors, Cundall, Epicam and Vattenfall Heat UK for their support for this week. We're going to get started now with our first panel session, which is focusing on power, specifically powering Britain, integrating renewables and nuclear for a greener energy future. And this session features three knowledgeable experts who will explore the dynamic landscape of the UK's energy sector. First up, we've got Professor Peter Childs, who's co-director of the Energy Futures Lab at Imperial College. He'll be addressing the importance of effective supply and demand management, highlighting the need for responsible, inclusive approaches that consider diverse stakeholder perspectives. Iolo James, Head of Communications of the Nuclear Industry Association, will underscore the essential role of nuclear energy in enhancing the UK's energy security and its achievement of net zero targets. And Zoisa North-Bond, who's Chief Executive of Octopus Energy Generation, will advocate the rapid adoption of renewables and customer engagement in creating a smarter, more affordable energy system. And I know that all of our speakers in this session will examine how we can effectively integrate renewable and nuclear energy sources to drive sustainable growth, address the challenges of transitioning away from fossil fuels, and foster demand flexibility in our energy infrastructure, which is what this session and indeed this whole conference is all about. First up, though, we have Professor Peter Childs, who I said was co-director of the Energy Futures Lab at Imperial College, and he's going to speak to us now for around about 2 minutes. Just a word on the format. After all of our speakers have spoken, we'll move into a Q&A session. If you've got any questions for any of our speakers, and I certainly have a few up my sleeve already, then please do feel free to post them in the questions box, which is indicated, funnily enough, by the question mark inside a speech bubble on the screen in front of you, depending on what kind of equipment you're using to access the event. But it is there, and it's got a question mark on it. Anyway, enough from me. Over to Peter Childs. Peter, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to hard questions. I do a lot of question asking in my role as a professor, so my turn to receive your questions. Anyway, I'm a huge advocate for renewables and have worked in wind, PVT, so photovoltaic thermal, where you can get efficiencies of the order of 80%. Now working on hydrogen for sustainable aviation fuel applications. But all of this has actually led me to becoming an advocate for nuclear. This is a pathway I didn't realize, and this will probably be music to the ears of people like Iolo. If you are in favor of things like wind, then there are times when it's not windy. 6 weeks over August across Europe, it tends to not be windy. Of course, in Britain, our solar does work because it's clean much of the time. But of course, there is occlusion, there's cloud, there's night time. So these are unreliable sources of energy, but they're reliable over an average of time. But it forces us really to have to consider other forms of reliable energy, and nuclear can be and is one of those. But becoming an advocate for nuclear also pushed me into enabling technologies. I helped run a couple of robot companies, Bladebug Limited, which does wind turbine maintenance robots, and Qbot Limited, which does underfloor insulation robots. And these kinds of technologies are really good for enabling complex technologies as we find in fission and fusion. And then just to comment on design, I have a lifelong passion in design, whether it's products or services or systems. And energy is about supply and demand. And we really do need to consider the user in our solutions. the user is one of many stakeholders when we come to energy, but of course they are so important. And the Ofgem speaker earlier this morning spoke of the importance of supplying reliable and financially accessible energy for our users. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much indeed, Peter, for that. And I was really pleased to hear you talk about design and its need to be considered as well, because I think often that is something that can be forgotten in the rush to actually get things done, not just in this sector, but I think throughout the infrastructure sector as a whole. So I think it's really good to hear you speak up for that. And rest assured, we will have some hopefully not too difficult questions, but you never know. Our audience is equally knowledgeable as the three of you. So let's see what we get during the course of the next 40 minutes or so. But thank you for the moment. Our next speaker is Iolo James, who's head of communications of the Nuclear Industry Association. Iolo, take it away. Iolo, we can't hear you at the moment, so I don't know whether or not you might need to take that and speak straight into the computer for some reason. I don't know whether or not there's an issue with your sound. Maybe our tech guy behind the scenes can actually advise you on what to do. But just try it once more, and if not, we'll move over to Zoisa. But just try again. No, there's definitely no there's no sound there, and I take it it's not just me who can't hear him. No, Peter's just confirmed that. Right, okay, we're going to try and get you sorted out, Iolo. So I think it's a question of probably the age-old trick of logging on and logging back in again, but we'll see whether that actually works. So we'll move over to Zoisa North-Bond, who's Chief Executive of Octopus Energy Generation. And apologise, Zoisa, for bringing you in slightly early, but having heard you speak before, I know that you'll be as impeccably prepared as you always are. So after that glowing introduction, the floor's yours.
Thank you, and hopefully you could hear me. Yes, great, amazing straight away. Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate being able to put across the perspective of renewable energy. And of course, I think time and time again we look at the cost of renewables, and it is the cheapest form of generation that we can be creating, and probably the quickest at this moment in time. And it will help decarbonise the UK grid exceptionally quickly. We've got some amazing targets in place for the UK for renewables. So doubling onshore wind, tripling solar power, quadrupling offshore wind. But I would say that my perspective very much is it can't just be about building more. It's more complex than that when we come to decarbonising an energy system. I look at some of the markets across Europe, including the UK, and there is so much energy waste, for instance, already on the system. We're wasting 2/3 of our power even before it gets to the point of consumption, and renewables is in that as well. We're wasting things like wind power, and I think 5% we wasted of our renewable energy capacity last year. So there is this enormous opportunity for technology to come in and look at optimizing those electrons that are on the grid. And being able to make sure that we're actually linking generation with consumption. And consumption to us is also a big part of the equation. We talked, I think Peter in his opening mentioned how renewables are intermittent, and they are. But we have this ability to mobilize the demand side into the future. There will be low carbon tech, which we're already seeing the advent of in homes, so things like EVs and heat pumps, and the customers will have the ability to put solar on their roofs and already do. What we can do is send them price signals using technology. When the wind is blowing and it's abundant and there's a load of it going through the grid and they can use it, and they can get cheaper prices for doing that. And then conversely, we're already seeing the National Grid offering a service where when there isn't an abundance of renewables, there's also signals that go to customers and homes, and they get paid for not using energy. I would advocate for a system that obviously has a mix of technologies running through it, but we look at all the things that we have available to us, as well as building more technology, and also how consumers can help in terms of balancing a grid and being able and enabling us to build more renewables.
Great, thanks very much, Zoisa, for that. And again, similar to Peter, we've got some interesting questions for you coming up as well, I'm sure. Hopefully now Iolo has joined us. I get the impression that he has, because I think I heard him actually log in. So I'm going to bring in Iolo James now, who, as I said before, is Head of Communications for the Nuclear Industry Association. Iolo, hopefully we can hear you loud and clear now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hurrah, yes.
There we go. Great news. Fantastic. Sorry about that, guys. I'll just take you through a little bit about the sector in the UK and where we are right now. So the UK's nuclear fleet is operating at just around 6 gigawatts at the minute. So that's around 5 reactors, 4 of which will come offline by the close of the decade. So leaving us with only 1 reactor, which will be Sizewell B. So, and in that reactor, we've got the last remaining clean power source that's generating power 24/7, 365 days a year. So that is until Hinkley Point C comes online, which we hope will be kind of around the end of the decade, early in the next decade. So in between now and 2030, we're actually losing a lot of good, reliable, clean power, which we need to replace urgently, really. And that includes kind of extending some of the current AGR stations that are online as well. And almost all the bodies that look at future energy systems in the UK, and that's including NESO, so they're looking at the grid. There's a big report out today published, say there needs to be kind of a mix of renewables and nuclear to kind of get us to that kind of net zero and that energy security kind of goal. And we kind of consistently are monitoring the grid on a kind of daily basis and looking at the regions that are producing the cleanest power, and consistently those regions that have got a mix, strong mix of wind, solar, nuclear, the ones that are consistently giving us the cleanest power. Today is a really good case in point. Low wind across Britain means that gas is basically made up of, well, the grid is made up of around 60% gas. That's followed by nuclear, then biomass, and then imports, a lot of imports from Europe as well. So the only 3 regions whose grids have got low carbon intensities today have got a mix of wind and nuclear. And today, wind's around 3 or 4%. So you've got South Scotland, Northwest, and Northeast of England that have got the cleanest grids because they've got that baseload nuclear capacity. And admittedly, from stations that have been operating for around 40 years. So crucially, we need to kind of get new infrastructure on the grid. And what it tells us is that we need to replace these stations with kind of newer plants, large scale, small scale. So, especially in kind of darker, still days like today and like the rest of this week as well. So we need to get on with making these decisions really. Sizewell C, that needs to kind of come on the grid as well as the SMRs as well. So, we don't foresee there being kind of a huge push for nuclear to be kind of part of this 2030 clean power, but looking ahead to kind of 2040, 2050 and beyond, we're going to need a lot of clean power, for the rest of the century and rest of time really. So we need to kind of get building and get building quickly and, to make these decisions as quickly as we can really. So, we can get a good mix of clean power on the grid. So, we're not having to kind of rely on gas like we are today. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Iolo, for that. I'm going to get straight to the questions because not only have I got some up my sleeve, we've got loads coming in the chat as well. I don't know whether our speakers can see the questions that are coming through. If not, that's not a problem because there's a couple of quite specific ones to specific people, but I'll get to those in due course because this session continues until 10:20. So, but there are some specific ones about your organisations and only to you. But we will get to get to those. I'm just going to kick off with a question first of all to Peter, and again, any of our other speakers, please feel free to dive in if you have a view. I was interested in what you were saying earlier on about the different kind of the balance really between kind of new build and retrofit. I mean, should we focus on new build or retrofit, which in your view delivers a better return on investment for the customer and also returns for the business?
Okay, I want to know whether you mean build of homes and retrofit of homes, or a build of new energy capacity and extension and improvement of energy capacity. I think I will answer both. So homes, I'd say it's probably a crime against sustainability to knock down the 12 million terraced homes and Taylor Woodrow archetype construction homes of the 1920s and 30s. They have huge embodied energy and are delightful buildings, and their energy efficiency can be dramatically improved. So there's a comment on that. But retrofit and improvement of our existing capacity, the UK has great capabilities in innovation and in improvement of what we've already got. And Zoisa actually mentioned this in her presentation, just talking about the wastage that we do have left, right, and centre. So there's always room to improve. And Iolo mentioned how some of our existing capacity in large scale energy provision has kept going well beyond its original intended lifespan. So I do think there's room for extension and improvement and retrofit, both for the way that we use energy and the way that we supply energy. Supply and demand, it always comes down to those two things in this topic.
Thanks for that, Peter, and particularly for your reassurance that terraced houses are not going to be torn down, okay, because I live in one. But anyway,
well, just on that, the notion of PVT, photovoltaic thermal, companies like Naked Energy do an amazing PVT system, and 80% efficiency. It heats your water, it pulls in the thermal energy as well as the electrical energy. We have amazing technologies out there, and you could call that a retrofit because it can go on existing infrastructure.
Okay, I've got a question for Iolo, and this is probably fairly straightforward to you, but I'm asking it because I know there may well be some people who need this underlining, maybe what you're watching in the audience, and that is kind of a twofold question really. Why is nuclear considered a green technology, and what's special about nuclear's economic contribution? If you can kind of mix those two together.
Yeah, well, I mean, happy to answer that, of course. I mean, we see nuclear as a clean, green technology. It's been producing low carbon power for a very, very long time. It's one of the world's biggest sources of clean power. It doesn't produce any greenhouse emissions. The UN see it as the power source that's got the lowest carbon intensity, uses the least amount of land. So it's up there with the cleanest power sources that we have. And, of all the clean power sources, it's the only one that operates 24/7. It's not intermittent. So it works really well in kind of having that base load of clean power. And on days like today, I mentioned it earlier, when there isn't much in terms of wind or solar, it's the one power source we have that does the heavy lifting. And obviously battery storage will come into that as well in the future. In terms of economic contribution, I mean, nuclear has been around for a very long time in the UK since the 60s, and we represent over 300 companies in the UK supply chain, and in terms of kind of the contribution of the jobs, over 80,000 jobs in the supply chain. It does a lot for communities and investment. If you look at Hinkley Point C, for example, that has generated around, I think, £5.5 billion for the southwest region in terms of contracts, businesses for or new business for local communities and so forth. So and hopefully we'll see the same with Sizewell C as well. So it's made a huge contribution, and is making a huge contribution for communities up and down the country, especially communities that really need investment as well. A lot of these kind of seaside communities, places like the northwest, for example, south of Scotland as well. So it's pulling its weight in terms of how much is giving to the to local economies, and can do the same for many years to come. And we see a lot of talk around good skilled union jobs with the new Labour government, and that's what nuclear gives you. So hopefully we can get building more of these kind of nuclear power stations, big and small ones. We can see that investment in local communities and see that jobs growth as well.
Thanks, Iolo. Just turning to Zoisa. How can technology be used to make a future energy system frictionless? And by that I mean one where intermittent renewables play the dominant role, because obviously I suppose that's what it's all about. If we're trying to get more power from those renewable sources, how can we do that? How can we make that future energy system work better?
Sorry about that. I managed to click the camera button rather than the microphone. Probably need to make technology work better myself. The way that we look at using technology is really helping productize things for customers. So making using energy, which is intermittent and clean and cheap, the easiest form of energy for customers to use. So I think the easiest way for me to kind of describe how we create a system-wide effect using technology is looking at some of our, say, wind turbines that we own as Octopus Energy. And when the wind blows, if you live locally and the electron is traveling a short distance, you will get 20% off your energy bill just for living locally to a wind turbine. But when the wind really picks up, we'll send a price signal to customers in their homes, and we'll say, if you use energy now, you can get as much as 50% off your energy bill. And of course, what that is doing is it's kind of saying to customers, there are better times to use energy than others. So, at those times, do all your energy intensive chores and you'll get cheap energy. And it's allowing them to also see a big discount in the energy that they are obviously using. And I think the way that you link things like generation back to customers has to be in that way. It has to be something that kind of really resonates with them, enables them to heat their homes and do all of those things. And it's that actually that will drive a cheaper system ultimately, is working very closely on the demand side. That product called the Fan Club. So we're creating kind of fans of wind energy, and of course they look like fans in communities. It has had the most extraordinary effect because it's even now driving change in the way that we create generation. So we're doing that very closely hand in hand with customers. So we had some tariffs that we offered called the Fan Club, but since then, we've had 35,000 communities reach out and say, can you come and build a wind turbine in my back garden? Because if it means that I get half price off my energy bill and we get cheaper energy as a result, then we would gladly host one of these things. So we've gone about starting to look at developing new renewables, but where customers want them, because ultimately they're going to be close to consumption. We will be building shorter grid networks, which will be cheaper, and customers will also be doing things that behave in the personality of renewables. So they'll be doing that as the primary kind of behaviour. And then when needed, when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, then of course we can move to alternative sources.
Thanks, Zoisa. I'm really struck by how your kind of engagement story with with Octopus. I think more and more now, all businesses, not just in this sector. I think the future is meaningful customer engagement, the creation of communities, dialogue, communication. Really, I think is absolutely essential, and I think the way in which you guys have gone about that is to be commended. And I think we'll see more of that across the piece. I think as well, because I really do believe that it's that it's the future. I want to dip into some of the questions that we got because we've got tons of them in front of me at the moment. And this is a question for all the panel, really. If I can ask you to try and answer these questions quite briefly, because I want to get through as many as possible. And the first one is looking at how the UK's ambitions on growing renewable energy production compare with other leading countries around the world, because we hear a lot, and certainly we heard a lot in the election campaign about how we were lagging behind, or we were leading the world, we were halfway there. What lessons can we learn from other countries to accelerate our growth in this area? And if I kick things off with Peter, and then Iolo, and then Zoisa. Peter.
The wind is an example where we were leading until about 10 years ago, and then of course our friends in China overtook dramatically. And but I just love what Zoisa's just mentioned about the enabler for wind. You engage with your local communities of practice, but of course it's not just residents, it's also industry. And renewables can be an enabler for industry. We talk about wanting a circular economy, a sharing economy, and we use energy for just about everything, whether it's our products, our communication, our heating, our cooling, you name it. If we want to recycle, that requires mobility and energy to do the recycling. Aluminium can be great packaging, but if you are going to smelt it again, then that requires energy. But that could be something associated with perhaps an oversupply of renewables, where the UK could become an exporter. And perhaps with innovations as are coming from Octopus with their community engagement of wind farms, perhaps many other suppliers could pick up upon this and go for good supply, which enables both residences and industry to operate in a much more sustainable manner.
Thanks, Peter, for that. Iolo.
So we're very lucky in the UK that we've got some brilliant nuclear sites. So some of the best around, really, including Wilva in North Wales and on Anglesey. But it's probably worth taking you guys through a list of kind of the other countries that are really gunning for nuclear at the minute, and that's kind of both SMRs, so smaller modular reactors, and gigawatt scale reactors too. So you've got Poland, Czech Republic, the Dutch want nuclear, France, Sweden, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, Hungary, Romania, Finland, for example. So these are countries that are in a kind of a long line of nations that want nuclear. So the UK is part of that kind of list, really. So what's important for us, though, is to kind of make our decisions quickly. So we're not kind of the back of the queue when it comes to kind of new nuclear infrastructure. There's only kind of a handful of companies out there who are big builders of big power stations. So the likes of EDF, KEPCO, Westinghouse, for example. And there's a lot more SMR vendors out there. The UK as well is kind of participating in this SMR competition, which is very, very exciting. World's first SMR competition. So hopefully by the spring, we'll have the results of that. So what we really need to get going now is just decisions to be made urgently. So we're kind of keeping pace with other countries. And the reason why countries are looking to nuclear is because, it's reliable, always on, clean power source. And if you look at the European grid, those countries that have got a mix of nuclear and renewables. So France, for example, Sweden, Finland, they've got the greenest grids in all of Europe. We're actually importing a lot of French nuclear today because we don't have enough of our own capacity. So that tells you a little bit about why we need our own sources for the jobs, for our own energy security as well. So we need to kind of make sure that we don't fall back of the queue when it comes to making these decisions, so we can get pace and match countries like France that have got around 60 gigawatts, for example, of nuclear. They're very lucky. So yeah, more nuclear on the grid. We need to kind of make decisions.
Thanks, Iolo. Zoisa, your view on how the UK is matching up to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the UK, it leads in many ways. We invest across the piece, across the world, as part of Octopus. And I would say, particularly in offshore wind, we are almost the envy of the world. Of course, China is now leading that race, but the UK really kicked that off. And I think it's something to be extremely proud of. The way that we created a CFD framework, the way that the tendering process worked through the Crown Estate. So I think an amazing kind of point to start. Where I think we start to lag behind, it's the part where I probably become the most frustrated, is speed and its ability to actually deliver renewables quickly in the UK. And I think at the moment it's taking 13 years to develop a solar farm, and that will be because of permitting and because of connecting to the grid. And I do think that there are things that we could be learning from other countries. Within Europe, for instance, where you have permitted development rights in certain areas where it may have been designated for things like wind and solar, to enable us to build much more quickly and get more renewables on the system. So I would say, for me, the UK is doing amazing things in offshore wind, and still is. And everybody wants to kind of understand more how we've kind of created that effect. But we do need to think about red tape, and we also need to think about the way we connect to grid as well.
Thanks very much. Just got a question again. Others may have a view on this. To Zoisa's point about engaging communities, and I knew this one would come up. How can you persuade local authorities to say yes to local solar and wind, or better insulation through window replacements, etc., despite having declared a climate emergency? And this is a question coming through from Sarah Vaughan. She said, despite declaring a climate emergency, her own local authority seems to care more about protecting listed buildings than enable carbon reduction through home improvements. She's basically lamenting the lack of a joined-up approach. What's your view on that, and what's your experience in working with local authorities?
Sorry, is that one for me or?
Yeah, sorry, you, Zoe. It was off the back of you talking about engaging with communities, but when you've got to go through local authorities, how do you navigate that, and have you had any issues?
Yeah, I would say, again, we look at trying to work with local authorities to give them confidence, but actually inspire them that their local constituents, this is something that they actually want. We have, for instance, we work with local authorities, and we tend to bring them into our offices here, in our head offices here in London, if they're based in the UK. And we show them one of our databases that we've created. And in it, it leads with all of the requests from communities across the UK, so those 35,000 data points. And we will show them very often how light wind is in their area, or how popular it is in their area. Also, within that database, we try and make sure that we're showing that to develop renewables is quick and easy. So we'll have things in there like substations and grid connections, and the availability for us to be connecting projects quickly and easily. We'll also have things like the land designations, so areas of outstanding natural beauty, all of those things. And then actually, very often we'll inspire them with showing them, once you take all that data together and you see it, how many projects could be created at local level. And this is a system, we call it Tinder for Wind. So it's called Winder. And it's matchmaking community demand with wind turbines. This has had the most tremendous reaction, and it was actually something that we used to engage with the Conservative government as well, when we were talking about the wind ban, and certainly as we were coming through the energy crisis, why wind needed, onshore wind in particular, needed to play a bigger part in our strategy. And I think through showing very often that this is something that people want, It's them driving it. It's not a developer, like an Octopus coming in and pushing, but it's society wanting it. I think that is the way. I think very often it has to be the voices of residents, of households, of community groups that will be able to interact with local authorities and be able to inspire them to do things differently.
Okay,
I would
thanks.
love to pick up on this if I
Yeah,
may.
you do, Peter. Go on.
And there's something amazing about change management and stakeholder engagement, and obviously Octopus are excellent at this and have shown something incredible for those listening in. It's not the first time that renewables have failed to really engage with communities. So the UK really does do a lot of things incredibly well. But from time to time we muck up, and but we're not the only country that's mucked up. In the US, for example, they have a lot of developments that then the local community has turned upon. And as a result, it's actually at Cornell, they have a school of industrial ecology, really, where they are looking at engaging with local communities. And we've learned, there's nothing wrong with learning from the way other people do things. Where renewables probably has gone wrong over the last, I'm going to say 3 decades, is the failure to upskill local communities, to the failure to actually make life better for people living and working locally. Who wants to import stuff and give and not get upskilled jobs for their local communities? So I think this just feeds into the comment around local authorities. Why don't we push for changes in the tendering process whereby it doesn't just talk about sustainability and value, but values? And those values include better jobs, better long-term employment, better education, better environment, everything better. And that's probably an area where the tender process just is not sufficiently sophisticated, because we have overly broad measures without considering the benefits for those living and working locally.
Thanks, Peter. I'm glad you talked about values there, because one of the key selling points from politicians of all colours in the recent period is that renewables should be a cheaper source of power. And I'm going to ask this question to everybody, but I want to start it with Zoisa, and that is, how can we make sure customers get the benefits of cheaper renewable power? Because I think that is crucial to actually getting more and more people to buy into the whole concept of not just renewables, but the whole sustainability net zero agenda, because we know there's a lot of disinformation out there, and quite a lot of it's going on over the pond at the moment. So how do we make sure that customers do benefit from cheaper renewables?
I mean, there are the ways that I talked about earlier, where we use technology to make sure that we send price signals at times when renewables are abundant, when there's lots of sun and there's lots of wind flowing through the grid. And we get customers kind of respond in those ways, like through the fan club, or we have many smart tariffs that do that. But I guess the longer answer is, I think we do need to stand back as the UK and at some stage start thinking about how do you pass the cheaper cost on to customers. Because it needs decoupling probably from the gas price to be able to do that. One of the things that we would like to see as Octopus is locational pricing. So this ability to look at consumption and look at how much generation is in various areas of the UK. And then based on the amount of consumption that you have, be able to pass on the cheaper electrons travelling those shorter distances down lines to consumers. we see this in some markets across Europe already. So I think we talked a bit about the Nordics earlier. They are a market that kind of looks at locational pricing, for instance, and they've managed to attract kind of big industry this way. I was very struck recently when I was at Climate Week in New York, speaking to a Swedish steel manufacturer that had actually located one of their factories on what they were calling a knot in the grid, where there was a lot of congestion. And actually, their factory was located over it, and they almost had negative pricing as a result. They had times of the day where they had almost free energy. It was so much cheaper. So I think standing back as the UK, there comes a point where if we want to be a fully renewable grid, we want to bring more renewables on, we do have to start considering the way that we have priced our market and the way that the prices are passed on to consumers.
Thanks very much to that. Iolo, do you have a view on that?
Yes, I mean, it's very interesting to hear Zoisa's remarks there, and I think where the UK has benefited from investing in renewables, be that solar and wind, is that prices for new renewable projects have come down because there's been a lot of investment, continuous investment in the technology for many decades, which we haven't really seen in our sector in the nuclear side of things. With continuous investment, with kind of a clear financing model, the government has kind of introduced borrowing costs, for example. New nuclear can also play a really important part in doing that, but that comes from having a clear plan, clear investment. There's a very famous clip of Nick Clegg about 10, 12 years ago saying, we don't need to build any more nuclear power stations because it takes too long and it costs too much. Well, if we'd done that 10 years ago, if we'd built a fleet of 3 or 4 or 5 stations 10 years ago, then we wouldn't be in the mess that we are now, especially with the energy crisis the last few years. And in the 80s and 90s, there was a huge push for gas because it was cheap, it was abundant, but obviously now we're paying the price for that over reliance, really. So if we can get things kind of moving to a point where people are understanding, and I think people are more so these days, understanding the system costs of energy and how much it costs to balance the grid. For example, I mean, the answer is about 7 billion over the past 2 years because of of our the need for gas to fill the gaps. So I think people will turn to renewables and nuclear because we need to decarbonize the grid. That's kind of a necessity, but also there's ways of doing it that ensures that the bill payers, the taxpayers, are the ones that are benefiting from it as well.
Thanks, Iolo. We've heard kind of, particularly from Zoisa and others, about kind of the use of how technology is being used in this whole area. And I just want to throw this one out to the whole panel, but starting with Peter, what game changers are on the horizon for companies in the energy sector, in your opinion? And that could be digital.
I'll actually speak to this across the board. Okay, so whether it's wind, solar or nuclear or other, infrastructure needs to be checked. And so the diagnostics, robotics type of technologies and AI and enabled by AI are incredible. And they're also about upskilling people. People often worry about robots, am I going to lose my job? But many robots require human in the loop in order to operate them, and you actually need to upskill, and it's actually cool and fun. You'd expect me to say that coming from Imperial College of College London with 24,000 of us who love our technology and can't wait to engage in it. But if you're inspecting a large-scale site, having a crawler system, a crawler robot that can go and inspect something, and when it comes up with an anomaly, you contact the human in the loop, get the human to do what we're really good at, diagnostics, making decisions. let the robot or the automated technology do the mundane, boring thing of getting there and doing the first overview inspection, and then pulling the human in to make the decision. Everybody can imagine why this is good in the nuclear environment, and there are so many robots associated with operating nuclear power stations, and everybody will understand why. But wind, 200-meter high towers, the blades are 104 meters long. Whilst it's fun to abseil on a blade once or twice, do you want to do it every hour of the day? And those blades move even in a quiescent, quiet day. Those blades really shift around. So having robots that can do this type of action can really enable a renewables future. So we're talking high tech here, and a suite of enabling technologies.
Thanks for that, Peter. Iolo, from your perspective, what kind of stuff are you guys looking at? That would come under the heading of game changers, or significant, new approaches, technology going forward.
Yeah, well, we've already seen, a huge push for SMRs and AMRs, so, small and advanced modular reactors that, in theory, are quicker to build, and hopefully we can see, kind of a huge fleet of those coming online in the next 10 years or so in the UK. And that kind of covers, grid power, but also, this huge push for power for data centers. Peter mentioned, the push for AI and quantum computing. You mentioned, Andy, this kind of game-changing approach. Well, we've just probably seen a bit of a game-changing series of announcements in the US with Amazon, Microsoft, and Google all coming out and putting the money where their mouths are, with putting a lot of their capital into kind of these new nuclear stations, because they know that data centers will need kind of a huge amount of clean, reliable power. So that's kind of a huge confidence boost for the industry, and that's not just for people's grids, so homes and businesses. This is for kind of this kind of huge push for AI as well. So that, I think there's kind of a lot of things happening in the nuclear sector. I think because the UK didn't build any nuclear for so long, we're playing a bit of catch up at the minute. So when we've got these kind of huge tech giants coming out in support of nuclear, I think it's only a good thing for the industry. I think over the next 5 or 6 years, I think energy demand of data centers will double in Europe. So there's kind of a real place for nuclear and renewables to kind of meet that goal. So companies and governments and businesses are realizing that if it's not going to be gas or coal, what will it be? Well, there's only a few options that we have, and that's renewables and nuclear. It's impossible to do it without those power sources, right? So hopefully we'll see a trend emerging over the next few years, decades, 20 years, that will enable us to kind of build more infrastructure. And remember as well, 2050 or 2030 is a huge goal. 2050 is another goal. We're going to need more power for forever, clean power. We don't hit 2050 and then we can just kind of rest back and go, oh, we've done it, brilliant, gold medal to us. We're going to need it for the rest of time. So that's an important point to make as well.
Thanks, Iolo. Zoisa, from your perspective, what's kind of on the Octopus horizon? I know that you're very much into innovation and future gazing. Is there anything that you can sort of reflect on where you think things are going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always look to the highest emitters and try to find solutions to them. In the UK, still heating in homes with gas boilers is huge. I think there are 23 million gas boilers in homes at the moment. And we actually see the solution to those, and also being able to suck up the intermittency of all this amazing renewable power that we're going to be creating will be heat pumps. And we are investing heavily in heat pumps for homes. It still is a bit of a cottage industry, but we do have a manufacturing and R&D plant in Ireland. We have created 4,000 jobs over the last year, where we're actually retraining gas boiler engineers to fit heat pumps in homes. Ultimately, we think that kind of more innovation will continue to drive down the cost. At the moment, along with government grants, you can actually fit a heat pump in homes at a cheaper rate than a boiler, which is great. But it needs more innovation, it needs more work. I think this is something that actually the UK could get behind. It could become a world leader in heat pumps.
Thanks very much, Zoisa, for that. And unfortunately, we've pretty much run out of time in this session. A combination of very insightful contributions from all of our speakers and just tons of questions, some of which we couldn't get to, but we'll try and answer those in other ways, through our social media around Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. But I'd just like to thank all of our speakers for their very interesting contributions today, to Professor Peter Childs, to Zoisa North-Bond and Iolo James as well. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time out to inform and in a small way educate as well us all on these very important issues. And also thanks, Peter, as well, for having the first appearance of a cat in our conference. Always good to see, and reminded me that we need to get another one here, because unfortunately, sadly, ours isn't with us anymore. But that's enough about cats. Thanks very much indeed to everybody. We're going to restart with our next session at 10:30. Again, to all of our attendees, just stay online. It's the same link, and we're going to be kicking off with a session on harnessing carbon capture, utilization and storage. So we'll see you all again at 10:30 a.m. Thanks very much indeed to our panelists again, and we'll see everyone else at 10:30. Thanks very much.